The rifle shot that ended the war took Gabriel Whitmore's left arm below the elbow, his younger brother's life, and every dream he had carried into battle. April 1865 brought silence to the battlefields, but no peace to the 23-year-old former Confederate soldier who limped back to Tennessee to find his family farm burned, his parents dead from fever, and nothing waiting for him but ash and memories that woke him screaming in the night. He sold what little remained for passage west, trading one kind of emptiness for another, until the high desert of New Mexico territory swallowed him whole, and he found work as a ranch hand near Lordsburg, doing whatever jobs a one-armed man could manage with twice the effort and half the pay. Josephine Matthews stood in the ruins of her life and watched smoke rise from what had been her home 6 hours earlier. She was 19 years old, newly widowed after 8 months of marriage, and the Apache raid that killed her husband Thomas and burned their homestead left her with nothing but the clothes she wore and a mule that had wandered back at dawn. The year was 1867, and the New Mexico territory was still bleeding from 1,000 small wounds, each one carving away another piece of someone's future. She had no family to return to in Missouri, her parents having died of cholera on the wagon train west, Thomas having been her only anchor in this brutal landscape. Now even that was gone. She started walking south as the sun climbed higher, leading the mule by a frayed rope, moving because staying still meant dying. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by creosote bushes and the distant purple shadows of mountains. Her throat burned with thirst by midday, her lips cracking, and she understood with perfect clarity that she might not survive the next 24 hours. The thought came without panic, just a dull acknowledgement of fact. Gabriel was riding fence line on the northern edge of the ranch when he spotted the figure stumbling through the heat shimmer. At first, he thought it was a mirage, common enough in this country, but his horse's ears pricked forward, and that made it real. He urged his mount into a trot, his right hand steady on the reins while his left arm, or what remained of it, ached with phantom pains that never quite left him. As he drew closer, he saw it was a woman, her dress torn and darkened with soot, her face burned red by the sun. "Madam," he called out, and she turned toward his voice with eyes that looked past him at first, unfocused. He dismounted quickly, uncorked his canteen with practiced one-handed efficiency. "You need water." She drank too fast and he had to pull the canteen back. "Slow now. Small sips or you will be sick." Her eyes found his face then, really seeing him. "They burned everything," she said, her voice cracked and raw. "My husband. They killed my husband." Gabriel knew that particular emptiness in her words, had heard it in his own voice often enough. "How long have you been walking?" "Since dawn. Maybe before. I do not remember." He helped her onto his horse, his movements careful and deliberate despite the awkwardness of managing everything one-handed. The mule followed without complaint as they started back toward the ranch. She swayed in the saddle and he walked beside her, keeping one hand ready to catch her if she fell. She did not speak again during the 2-hour journey, and he did not press her. Some stories needed time before they could be told. The ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Pike who had lost his own family to Comanche raids years before, took one look at Josephine and sent for the cook's wife. They settled her in the bunkhouse kitchen, fed her beans and bread, let her drink her fill of water. Gabriel stood outside, his hat in his hand, waiting without knowing exactly what he was waiting for. When Pike emerged, the older man studied him with eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty. "She says Apache hit her place up near Hatchita. Husband dead, homestead gone. She has got nothing." Gabriel nodded. Hachita was a struggling settlement 30 miles north, barely more than a handful of buildings clustered around a water source. He had passed through it once, noted its vulnerability, wondered why anyone tried to make a life in such exposed country. Now he knew the answer was the same as anywhere else because people needed to make lives somewhere, and the territory did not offer many choices. "She can stay here," Gabriel asked, "for a spell. But we are not running a charity. She will need to earn her keep or move on." Pike's expression softened slightly. "You did good bringing her in, Whitmore. Real good." Over the following days, Josephine found her strength returning along with a hollow determination that Gabriel recognized in himself. She insisted on working, and the cook's wife, a broad woman named Sarah who ran the ranch kitchen with military precision, put her to task preparing meals for the 24 men who worked the spread. Gabriel saw her in passing, carrying water, kneading bread, her hands moving with the mechanical efficiency of someone trying not to think. He understood that, too. They first spoke properly on a Sunday evening when most of the hands had ridden into Lordsburg for drinking and cards. Gabriel had never developed a taste for either, too aware of how little money he earned and how easily it could disappear. He was sitting outside the bunkhouse, using his teeth and his remaining hand to roll a cigarette, when she approached with a cup of coffee. "Sarah said you take it black," Josephine said, offering it to him. "That is kind, thank you." He took the cup, set aside his tobacco. "You are settling in all right." She sat on the bench beside him without asking permission, which he appreciated. Too many people treated widows and cripples like they might shatter from ordinary human interaction. "I am alive. That counts for something. It counts for a lot." They sat in silence as the sky deepened from blue to purple to star-scattered black. Finally, she spoke again. "They told me you lost your arm in the war. At Appomattox, more or less. In the chaos just after, lost my brother too, lost everything really." "I am sorry. Me too, about your husband." She was quiet for a long moment. "I barely knew him. We married quickly, needed each other for practical reasons more than anything else. But he was kind to me, and he did not deserve what happened." Her voice caught slightly. "No one deserves that." Gabriel thought about all the men he had seen die, both in blue and gray, and how few of them had deserved it. No, they do not. Over the weeks that followed, they developed an easy friendship born from shared understanding. Gabriel showed her how to manage tasks one-handed when she burned her palm badly on a pot handle and could not grip properly for several days. She helped him button his shirt on mornings when his stump ached too badly to manage the awkward angles. They traded stories carefully, testing the weight of their grief like farmers testing ice on a winter pond, seeing what it could hold. "I thought about going back to Missouri," Josephine said one evening as they walked to check on a mare about to foal. "But there is nothing there either. My parents are buried on the trail somewhere in Kansas. I do not even know exactly where. Family, none that I know of. An aunt maybe, but we were never close. And I do not have money for passage even if I wanted to go." She glanced at him. "What about you? Any kin back east?" "All dead or scattered. The war broke everything apart. Even if I went back, Tennessee is not home anymore. Not sure anywhere is." "Maybe home is not a place," she said quietly. "Maybe it is just wherever you stop running." Gabriel considered that, found truth in it. "I am not sure I know how to stop." "Me neither." The foaling went smoothly, and they stood together in the lantern light watching the new colt struggle to its feet, all wobbly legs and determination. Josephine laughed, the first time Gabriel had heard that sound from her, and something in his chest loosened slightly. She caught him looking and smiled, shy suddenly. "What? Nothing. Just good to hear you laugh. Good to have a reason." Their hands brushed as they left the barn, and neither pulled away immediately. The contact lasted only seconds, but Gabriel felt it hours later, lying awake in his bunk, wondering at the strange warmth that had settled beneath his ribs. He had not thought about such things in years, had assumed that part of life was finished for him. What woman would want a broken Confederate with one arm and nightmares? But Josephine's eyes held no pity when she looked at him, only recognition. September brought cooler nights and news that the ranch would be reducing its crew for winter. Pike called Gabriel aside after supper one evening, his expression apologetic. "I got to let 3 men go. You have worked hard and I respect that, but the owners want to keep the men who can do full work faster." Gabriel had expected this eventually. "I understand. When? End of the month, I will give you a fair letter of reference." Pike hesitated. "The cook's wife says Josephine is planning to head to Hatchita, try to file a claim on her old land. Might be you two could travel together for safety. Just a thought." Gabriel found Josephine in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. She was kneading dough for the next day's bread, her hands working the flour with steady rhythm. When he told her about being let go, she nodded without surprise. "Sarah told me today that they do not need extra kitchen help through winter either. I saved a little money, enough for supplies maybe." She shaped the dough into a round, covered it with a cloth. "I am going back to Hatchita. The land is still mine legally. I can file the claim properly, try to rebuild. Alone. Unless you have a better idea." Gabriel did not, but the thought of her attempting that alone made his stomach clench. "It is dangerous country. The Apache are still raiding. It is dangerous everywhere. At least in Hatchita I have land, a legal claim to something. That is more than I have anywhere else." She met his eyes directly. "Would you come with me?" The question hung between them, weighted with more than just practical considerations. Gabriel knew what he was really being asked and what he was really answering when he said, "Yes, we could build something together. Partners, equal shares." "Partners," she agreed and offered her hand. He shook it with his right hand, her grip firm and warm and solid. They left the ranch on a clear October morning with a wagon Pike helped them purchase using their combined savings, loaded with lumber, tools, seed, and enough supplies to last through winter if they were careful. The journey to Hatchita took 3 days, following rough trails through country that showed its scars openly. They passed burned-out homesteads, abandoned mine works, graves marked with crude wooden crosses. "Why here?" Gabriel asked on the second night as they sat by their small fire. "What made you and your husband choose this place?" Josephine stared into the flames. "The land was cheap and water was available. We thought we could make it work. Maybe we were naive." She looked up at the vast sweep of stars overhead. "But people do make it work eventually. Towns grow. Things get safer, or at least that is what we told ourselves. Think we are naive too, probably. But what choice do we have?" They reached Hatchita at noon on the 3rd day. The settlement consisted of perhaps 20 buildings clustered around a natural spring, with scattered homesteads spreading out into the surrounding desert. Josephine's former land was on the eastern edge, 5 acres with the charred remains of a cabin and a small barn that had partially survived. Gabriel surveyed the damage with a practiced eye. "Foundation is still good. Barn can be salvaged. We have enough lumber to build a 1-room cabin before winter. It will not be fancy." "Fancy is the last thing I need," Josephine said. "Just walls and a roof." They filed the proper papers in Hatchita's cramped land office, the clerk barely looking up as he processed the claim. Gabriel added his name as co-owner, making their partnership legal. Walking out into the bright afternoon sun, he felt something he had not experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond simple survival. The work was brutal. Every task took Gabriel twice as long one-handed, and Josephine lacked the physical strength for the heaviest labor. But they adapted, finding rhythms and methods that worked. She held beams while he nailed them into place. He lifted what she could not carry. They worked through the October heat and into November's chill, their hands blistering and healing and blistering again. The cabin took shape slowly, one board at a time. Other homesteaders stopped by occasionally, offering advice or lending tools. An older couple named the Hendersons brought over a pot of stew one evening and stayed to help raise the roof frame. Their own spread was a mile west, and they had survived 3 years in this country through stubbornness and luck. "You two married?" Mrs. Henderson asked as they ate, her question casual but her eyes sharp. "Partners," Josephine answered quickly. "Working the claim together." "Practical arrangement." The older woman's tone suggested she did not entirely believe that was all it was, but she did not press. "You will want to get married, though, eventually. Makes things easier legally, and people talk." After they left, Gabriel and Josephine sat in the partially completed cabin, their backs against the new walls. "She is not wrong," Gabriel said carefully, "about people talking, and about legal protection." "Is that a proposal?" Josephine asked, her tone light but something serious underneath. "More of an observation. But if it were a proposal, what would you say?" She turned to look at him, her face half in shadow from the lantern light. "I would say I have been thinking the same thing, and I would say that I trust you more than I have trusted anyone in a long time. And I would say that when I think about the future, I am glad you are in it." She paused. "But I would also want it to be real, Gabriel, not just convenient. I have had convenient. If we do this, I want it to mean something." His heart was pounding harder than it had any right to, given they were just talking. "It would mean something to me. It already does." "Then yes. Whenever you actually ask, the answer is yes." Gabriel took her hand carefully, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. "Josephine Matthews, will you marry me? Not because it is convenient or practical, but because I look at you and see someone I want to build a life with. Because your strength amazes me every day. Because when I am with you, this place feels a little less like exile and a little more like home." Her eyes were bright with tears. Yes, for all those reasons and more. They were married the following week by Hachita's circuit preacher, a traveling Methodist who came through once a month. The ceremony took place in the cabin with only the Hendersons and 2 other neighbor families as witnesses. Josephine wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had altered for her. Gabriel wore his cleanest shirt and tried not to let his hand shake as he slipped a plain silver band onto her finger, purchased with the last of his spare money. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Gabriel did, gently, aware of their small audience. But Josephine's hands came up to frame his face, and she kissed him back with enough feeling to make the witnesses laugh and applaud. And when they broke apart, her smile was radiant. The wedding supper was modest but cheerful, and when their guests finally left them alone, Gabriel and Josephine stood together in the cabin that was truly theirs now, everything feeling suddenly very real and immediate. "I have been married before," Josephine said quietly, "but it never felt like this. I was not nervous then." "I am nervous now," Gabriel admitted. "I want to do this right." She took his hand and led him to the bed they had built together from rough lumber and corn shuck mattress. "Then we will figure it out together. That seems to be what we do best." They undressed each other slowly in the lantern light, Josephine helping him with buttons and sleeves, Gabriel carefully unlacing her dress. His stump had long since healed, but the scars were still livid, and he felt self-conscious until she kissed them, then kissed his shoulder, then his mouth. "You are not broken," she whispered against his skin. "Neither am I. We are just different than we were before." Their lovemaking was tender and unhurried. both of them learning each other's bodies and responses, finding pleasure in the discovery. Afterward, they lay tangled together under heavy quilts, listening to the wind outside and the settling sounds of their new home. "Tell me something about yourself I do not know yet," Gabriel said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Josephine thought for a moment. "I used to want to be a teacher. Before the war, before everything. I love reading, and I thought it would be wonderful to help children learn." "Maybe you still can. Hachita will need a school eventually. Maybe," she pressed closer to him. "Your turn. Something I do not know." "I am terrified most of the time," he said honestly. "That I will fail, that I cannot protect you, that everything we are building will fall apart. Me too. But we are terrified together, so that has to count for something." It did count, Gabriel thought as sleep pulled him down. It counted for everything. Winter arrived with unexpected gentleness, the desert cold but not brutal. They finished the cabin and turned their attention to the barn, clearing the burned timbers and salvaging what they could. Gabriel's shoulder ached constantly in the cold, but having Josephine beside him made the work bearable. They fell into domestic rhythms, cooking together, planning the spring planting, talking through long evenings about their dreams and fears. "I want children," Josephine said one night in late December as they lay in bed. "Is that something you want too?" Gabriel's throat tightened. "I always thought I did before the war. After, I figured I had lost that chance along with everything else. But yes, with you, yes. It might not happen right away. Then we will enjoy the trying," he said, which made her laugh and swat his chest and pull him close for a kiss that led to more. The spring of 1868 brought rain and hope in equal measure. They planted corn, beans, squash, and every seed they could afford. Gabriel built chicken coops while Josephine traded work with other homesteaders' wives, learning the particular skills this country demanded. The hens they purchased started laying regularly, providing eggs to eat and sell. Their small herd of 3 goats gave milk. It was not prosperity, not even close, but it was survival that felt like it might transform into something more. The nightmares still came for Gabriel sometimes. The phantom pain still woke him, but Josephine would hold him in the dark and talk him back to the present, her voice steady and real. When her own grief ambushed her, when she would stop mid-task and stare at nothing with tears streaming down her face, he would wrap his arm around her and wait it out, letting her cry without trying to fix what could not be fixed. "I am sorry," she said one such afternoon, wiping her eyes roughly. "I thought I was past this. Grief does not work that way, trust me. It comes in waves forever, just further apart over time. Does it get easier? Not easier, just different, more manageable." He tipped her chin up gently. "And you do not have to manage it alone anymore." By summer, Josephine suspected she was pregnant. By autumn, there was no doubt. Her belly swelled as the crops came in, and they worked frantically to harvest and preserve everything they could. The Hendersons and other neighbors pitched in, the community pulling together as frontier communities did because survival depended on it. Gabriel was terrified. The thought of bringing a child into this hard country, of being responsible for another fragile life, made his breath catch. But watching Josephine's face light up when the baby kicked, seeing her hands curve protectively over her stomach, he found himself believing that maybe they could do this. Maybe they could give their child what they had both lost, a home and safety and love. What if I cannot do it right? He asked one night, his hand splayed across her belly, feeling the small movements within. "I only have one arm. What if I cannot hold the baby properly or keep them safe? Gabriel Whitmore, you have built a life with one arm that most men could not build with 2. You will be a wonderful father." She covered his hand with hers. "And I will be right there beside you, figuring it out as we go. Like everything else. Winter came again, and Josephine grew larger and more uncomfortable. The midwife from Hatcheta, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Talbot, visited regularly to check on her. In late January 1869, on a night when the temperature dropped below freezing and frost glittered on the windows, Josephine's labor began. Gabriel boiled water and fetched Mrs. Talbot, and tried to stay calm while his wife labored through the night. Her cries tore at him, made him want to do something, fix something, take her pain onto himself. But all he could do was hold her hand when she allowed it, wipe her face with cool cloths, and tell her she was strong. She could do this. He was right here. Dawn was breaking when their son finally arrived, entering the world with a furious wail that was the most beautiful sound Gabriel had ever heard. Mrs. Talbot cleaned the baby efficiently, checked him over, then placed him in Gabriel's waiting arm. "You have a healthy boy," she announced. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a good set of lungs. Gabriel stared down at the tiny red face, at the small hands waving furiously, and felt something break open in his chest. All the death he had seen, all the loss and pain and years of just surviving, suddenly had a counterweight. This small life, red and wrinkled and perfect, anchored him to the world in a way nothing else ever had. "Let me see him," Josephine said, exhausted but smiling, and Gabriel carefully transferred their son to her arms. Watching her face as she looked at their baby, seeing the fierce love there, he understood that they had finally done it. They had taken ashes and built something living. "What should we name him?" she asked. Gabriel thought of his brother, dead in the mud at Appomattox, who would never have this chance. "Thomas, for your first husband, if that is all right. He helped bring you to this place. That counts for something." Tears slipped down Josephine's cheeks. "Thomas Gabriel, so he carries both of you." "Thomas Gabriel Whitmore." Gabriel tested the name, found it solid. "Welcome to the family, son." The baby's first year was exhausting and wonderful in turns. Gabriel learned to change diapers one-handed, to cradle his son securely, to walk the floor during fussy nights while Josephine caught a few hours of sleep. He sang old ballads he remembered from childhood, told stories about Tennessee before the war, promised this small person that things would be better for him. Their crops that year were good, the best yet. They sold surplus in Hatcheta and saved every penny they could. Gabriel built an addition onto the cabin, giving them a real bedroom separate from the main room. Josephine started teaching the neighbor children to read 2 afternoons a week, fulfilling the dream she had mentioned their wedding night. Life was hard, but it was theirs, earned through blood and sweat and stubborn refusal to give up. On a hot afternoon, in July 1870, Gabriel was working on reinforcing the barn when he heard a wagon approaching. He turned to see a well-dressed man driving a fancy rig, clearly not a local homesteader. The man pulled up and climbed down, offering his hand. "Gabriel Whitmore, I am Henry Sutton, representing the Territorial Land Commission. I wanted to speak with you about your property." Gabriel's stomach clenched, remembering all the ways authority could destroy a life. "What about it?" "The railroad is planning a line through this region in the next 5 years. Your land sits near a projected water station. The commission is interested in purchasing a portion of your acreage at a very fair price." Gabriel listened as Sutton outlined numbers that made his head spin. Enough money to expand their operation significantly, to build a proper house, to ensure their son's future, but also selling off a piece of what they had built from nothing. "I need to discuss this with my wife," Gabriel said carefully. "Of course. I will be at the hotel in Hatcheta for 3 more days. Think it over." That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Gabriel and Josephine sat at their table and talked through the implications. The money was substantial, but giving up land felt like retreat. "We would still have 3 acres, Josephine pointed out. "Enough for our needs. And with that money we could build something lasting, maybe even expand, help other homesteaders get started. You think we should take it?" "I think we came here with nothing but determination. We built a life." "This is not giving up. This is being smart about opportunities." She took his hand. "Besides, the railroad means more people, more trade. Hatcheta could really grow. That school I am teaching could become official. Thomas could have real opportunities." Gabriel looked around their cabin at the life they had carved from hardship. Then he looked at his wife's face, at the wisdom and strength there, and nodded. "All right. We do it together. Partners. Always partners." They signed the papers 3 days later. The money arrived in installments over the following months, and with it came changes. They built a real house with wooden floors and glass windows, and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. Gabriel hired help to build a larger barn and purchase more livestock. Josephine discovered she was pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy felt easier, less frightening, because they had survived so much already. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1871, arriving with less drama than her brother, as if she knew she was entering a secure world. They named her Ruth, after Gabriel's mother, and watching Josephine nurse their daughter while young Thomas played on the floor nearby, Gabriel felt wealthy in ways that had nothing to do with money. The railroad arrived in 1873, transforming Hatcheta from struggling settlement to bustling town. The Whitmore property became valuable as a supplier to the railroad workers and eventually to the passengers who stopped at the water station. They expanded their operations, hiring hands, growing their herds. Gabriel's missing arm became just another fact about him, not a definition. Men respected what he had built more than they judged what he had lost. Josephine's school became official, funded by the territorial government, and she became a vital part of the growing community. Women sought her advice, children adored her, and the town council frequently consulted both Whitmores on matters of development and governance. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1877, Gabriel took Josephine to the hill overlooking their property where they had first stood together, surveying the burned ruins. Now a sturdy house stood there, barns and corrals spreading out around it, fields green with crops, their children playing in the yard below. "Do you ever think about what we have lost?" Josephine asked, leaning into his side. "Every day, but I think about what we found more." He turned to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You saved me, not just practically. You saved me from disappearing into everything I lost." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That is what partners do." They kissed as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, and when they finally pulled apart, Gabriel saw tears on her cheeks that mirrored his own. "I love you," he said, the words still feeling new even after all these years. "I will love you until I stop breathing." "And beyond that," she said, "we rebuilt from ashes. We made something beautiful. That does not end just because we do." They stayed on that hill until darkness fell and Thomas called up to them that supper was ready. Walking down hand in hand, Gabriel thought about the young man he had been, stumbling west with nothing but wounds and loss. That man would not have believed this future was possible. But that man had not yet met Josephine, had not yet learned that from complete destruction, with the right person beside you, you could build not just a life but a home, not just survival but joy. The years continued to unfold. Thomas grew tall and strong, choosing to stay and help run the family operation rather than seeking fortune elsewhere. Ruth inherited her mother's love of teaching and her father's determination, eventually taking over the school when Josephine decided to focus on other community projects. More children followed, another son and another daughter, filling the house with noise and laughter and the ordinary chaos of a full life. Gabriel's hair went gray, his remaining hand developing arthritis that made work painful some mornings. Josephine's face lined with age, her dark hair streaking silver. They moved slower, but they moved together, still partners in everything, still looking at each other across the dinner table with the same warmth that had sustained them through the hardest years. In 1890, on a warm spring evening when the desert was blooming improbably with wildflowers after unexpected rain, they sat together on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas's wife was calling them in for supper, while Ruth and her husband prepared to leave in their wagon. The railroad whistle sounded in the distance, regular as clockwork now, and Hatchita spread out beyond their property with electric lights just beginning to appear in the wealthier homes. "We did all right," Gabriel said quietly, his hand finding Josephine's as naturally as breathing. "We did better than all right. We did wonderful." She squeezed his fingers gently. "Do you ever regret it? Coming here, starting over with nothing?" Gabriel thought about the question seriously, as he always did when she asked important things. "I regret the war. I regret what we both lost before we found each other. But I do not regret a single day since you walked into my life half dead from the desert." "Romantic," she teased, but her eyes were soft. "I mean it. Every hard year, every struggle, every morning I woke up not sure we would make it. None of that matters weighed against what we built, against you, against this family." He gestured at the scene before them, the life they had created from literally nothing. "How could I regret any path that led here?" Josephine rested her head on his shoulder, fitting perfectly into the space she had occupied for more than 2 decades. "I used to think my life ended when the Apache came, when Thomas died and I had nothing. But I was wrong. That was when my real life began. The one I chose instead of the one that just happened to me. You think we chose this, felt more like stumbling into it, maybe at first, but every day after we chose to stay, to build, to love each other even when it was hard. That is the difference." She lifted her head to look at him. "I choose you every day, Gabriel Whitmore. I always will." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, tasting like coming home even after all these years. When they broke apart, their grandchildren were staring and giggling, and Thomas was grinning at them from the doorway. "You two are embarrassing," Ruth called out, but her voice was full of affection. "Good," Josephine called back. "Learn from our example." As the evening deepened into night, and the family gathered around the long table Gabriel had built 20 years ago, passing food and sharing stories and filling the house with warmth, Gabriel looked around and understood completely. This was what rebuilding looked like. Not just structures or wealth or success, but people who loved each other, who chose each other daily, who transformed loss into legacy. He had lost everything in the war, that was true. His arm, his brother, his home, his innocence about the world's cruelty. Josephine had lost everything after, her husband, her home, her certainty about the future. But from those ashes, from that complete destruction, they had forged something that could not be taken away by war or raid or disaster. They had built a family. They had built love. They had built a life that mattered. Later, when everyone had gone home or to bed and the house was finally quiet, Gabriel and Josephine climbed the stairs to their bedroom, their movements slower than they once were but no less certain. They prepared for bed with the comfortable familiarity of decades together, and when they finally lay down, Josephine curled into his side as she had every night for 23 years. "Gabriel," she whispered in the darkness. "Yes, love. Thank you for finding me, for choosing me, for all of this." He held her closer, his heart full to bursting. "Thank you for being someone worth finding, worth choosing, worth rebuilding a life for." They drifted toward sleep together, secure in what they had created, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it as they had faced everything else. Together, as partners, transforming every challenge into another chapter of their ongoing story. The story of two people who lost everything and found each other, who took ashes and made beauty, who proved that even in the harshest country, love could not just survive but flourish. Outside, the desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like promises. Inside, the house held generations of love and laughter, built on a foundation of loss transformed into hope. And in the master bedroom, two people who had saved each other in every way that mattered slept peacefully, their dreams finally untroubled, their future secure, their love the greatest treasure either had ever known or would ever need. The Wild West had taken everything from them, but they had taken something back. They had claimed their piece of it and made it bloom. That was victory enough for any lifetime, and more than enough for a love story that had started with desperation and grown into something that would outlast them both, living on in their children and grandchildren, and in every person who heard their story, and understood that from complete destruction, with courage and partnership and stubborn faith in tomorrow, anything was possible.